Hello and welcome back, and I'm here at the airport in Taipei after a few days at Computex. So while I was there, Synology invited me to a PR event where they were talking about the future of DSM, the next chapter of DSM as they labelled it. Now, I'd actually already recorded an introduction to this video. I recorded it just before going to the PR event because a bunch of different people off the record had told me DSM 8, DSM 8, they're going to talk about this station 8, DSM 8.0, we're going to talk about it. And I heard all of this stuff. Unfortunately, they didn't talk about DSM 8.0, they talked about DSM 7.4. So I've had to record the whole intro, but I just wanted to mention that, just how infuriating it was. And I'm going to talk about some of the things they're talking about in this new DSM 7.4 update coming in a few weeks. Now, number one, I want to highlight straight away out the gate, do check out the article by Luca over at Black Void, because he has done a full detailed breakdown with slides and everything of the DSM 7.4 update coming in a couple of weeks. I think it's the 16th of June rolling out. I'm still waiting for confirmation if that is an early beta. It's probably a release candidate at the very least, but if it's anything like DSM 7.3, it looks like it's going to go straight out the gate with no real public beta testing there, good or bad, that's really up to you. The other thing I want to highlight, and this is me actually throwing some serious credit to Synology here, I've been very critical of this brand for the last year or so, ever since that hard drive stuff, and also stuff in between with regard to licensing and some of the stuff with software choices. So frankly, they could have made a very easy choice and not invite me to this event, and I wouldn't have been surprised. And it's the fact they didn't just invite me to it, they notified me well in advance, gave me PR information and more. So again, credit to them, given how critical I have been to let me attend this event with them. But let's go on to the details. Now, a little trigger warning, there's a lot of AI. There's a lot of AI in this. And I'm almost certain AI has almost certainly been implemented in some of the development in the back end over in Synology's research. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is not strictly AI related, and that is to do with the storage efficiency optimizer, or the optimization of storage, space saving. In DSM 7.4, they're going to be rolling out an optimized add-on for Storage Manager for basically post-production, deduplication and compression. These are things that have already been available in varying degrees of solutions and storage media within DSM, but this is going to be built in natively ground level there with the Storage Manager, but crucially not just at volume level, this is shared folder level. Now this isn't inline, very important, inline being when the process is happening that the compression or the deduplication is happening in real time. This is post-production, technically offline compression and deduplication there. But the fact that this is one, happening at the shared folder level, and two, going to be happening afterwards, so you can set it up where every shared folder you make moving forward is going to be enjoying this, is great. Also real quick, I am recording this in an airport. If you hear those three bings, we're almost certainly going to cut mid-vid. But carrying on, there are some limitations to bear in mind. One crucially you're going to keep hearing time and time again. Number one, you can't use encrypted folders, you can't use folders that will be utilised by active backup for business, the surveillance station, that sort of stuff. The same goes to Office Suite applications like Mail Plus. You're not going to be able to utilise those folder areas. Also, you're going to have to take advantage of at least a 4-core processor. They didn't spell out, I thought it was an x86 like an Intel or an AMD, but I think it is. And alongside that, you need at least 2 gigabytes of RAM, likely more than that, particularly for the inline, the post-production deduplication there. The other thing that's crucial though is you're only going to be able to utilise this on devices that are beyond 2021 Synology portfolio. That means the prefix 21 onwards. Now that, for me, is a tiny bit of an amber flag, if not a red flag, and that is because this is a choice that's being made, at least in terms of rollout, with regards to year, not hardware. Point I'm making, say DS920, a 4-bay Intel quad-core processor now with 4 gig of memory. That's got exactly the same hardware as the DS425 Plus released less than a year ago. Exactly the same CPU, exactly the same RAM. But the 920 isn't going to be able to enjoy the DSM 7.4 update of storage efficiency, and I suspect not enjoy the DSM 7.4 update period, because so many of the things I'm going to talk about today seem to be locked behind the 2021 devices and higher there, so bear that in mind. And at the end of this video, if it's not already in the chapters, I'm going to go through the highlights and the lowlights later on. But let's crack on with the next point. But even before we get into the weeds, we have to highlight one major architectural difference in the way Synology were presenting DSM and its architecture moving forward. And that was a very important point they made, and that was with regard to the design of DSM and its architecture is no longer exclusively going to be designed around humans. It's being designed around both human utilization and AI agent utilization. And that means the layout of the data, the architecture, and the retrieval of that information is going to be designed around the idea that an AI or an AI agent, at the very least, is going to do a much better job and a much more convenient job in pulling data from that cohesively. Now, again, I know that's not going to be for everyone that likes the idea of a NAS brand that's leaning more and more into the subject of AI, and this is a Computex adjacent event after all, but do keep that in mind. Also, there was a whole section of the presentation, and again, we've recorded the whole thing. I might chop it all together. I'll speak to Synology about that because it seems a bit mean-spirited to do that, but I might. But they really spoon-fed at the beginning. Some might say necessarily, a lot might argue unnecessarily about what you actually do with AI in a NAS or how AI and LLMs actually pull data from that. I would argue the majority of people in that room know that, but I guess they had to put the groundwork down and talk about the data layout there. But then after that, they laid it on thick on the subject of AI implementation and AI design in DSM. Which brings us into DSM Agent, so the next big part of DSM 7.4. Now, this actually formed in a couple of different ways. The first one was to do with effectively a desktop assistant living on the right-hand side. You can pull up when you need it. I know a lot of users don't like the idea of a tiny little robot or something in the side, but it was actually quite unobtrusive that you could just pull it up when you needed. And it was somewhere between taking advantage of knowledge center guides, but with a very key difference that it had screen awareness. So when you were asking it questions about your system and guidance and help to get things done, when you asked follow-up questions, it would see what was happening on screen in real time. Now, we will circle around to this later on, but a big part of that, depending on the power of the system you use, was utilizing what Synology were saying was a proprietary in-house, their own LLM, designed and tailored towards their own system. Luckily, during a Q&A at the end of the event, people were asking questions back and forth, and a very insightful individual, not me, but I did put a question, I'll come back to that later, effectively asked if you are building, which they admitted, on an open source LLM, is this proprietary? To which they said yes, because it is utilizing elements of DSM, or at least designed around it. Again, we've talked about the open source nature of Synology software, Linux and everything laying underneath, but I know that's going to rub some people up the wrong way. But ultimately, this is about utilizing human language to, one, control and set up your NAS for the first time, and moving forward, checking logs and such, but also moving forward from that, getting tailored alerts, getting real-time information from the system with DSM Agent working with you, the end user. Now again, as long as it comes with an off switch, and as long as it comes with deep kind of layer by layer control and authentication by the admin user, and isn't just it's all on and it's up to you to turn it off, I think there is an argument for this that some users will like a feature like this. And again, when they were sort of going through utilizing some of the existing parameters of AI services within, say, the Office suite that they use, you know, they're adding it into the chat system there. It's always been in the Office system with AI Console, and a lot of that with, you know, make me an email, translate this, that, and the other. It's all there already. This just really rolls it in on a system DSM level rather than an app-by-app basis. Also, and again, they kind of have to be, they were at pains to detail the stack, the AI stack, and where everything was living. And of course, there, first and foremost, right there at the top, was the guardrails to stop the AI agent when it has app integration, when it has folder and file integration, when it has certain access to apps and services, and therefore bringing it all the way down the model level to the amount of hardware utilization being utilized by these systems. All of that is apparently heavily defined in the end by the guardrails that are set, which is kind of what you want to see. But again, seeing it in practice is different to seeing a bunch of charts on screen. The next thing is to do with the choices users are going to have, because this is, as mentioned, going to extend to devices right the way back to the 21 series that have the minimum level of hardware I detailed earlier. But they are rolling out two very specific ways you can implement this moving forward. The first one's going to be such as in the Rackstation series, and that's going to be taking advantage of some of the base level features. But if you want to go for something beefier, they are now going to be rolling out AI station devices. This is NAS and GPU equipped systems, or at the very least, I imagine, minimum CPU ready architecture, but it did seem heavily implied that these are all going to be GPU devices. But with the added benefit, again, I know this is a multi-site advantage. They were talking about how you're going to be able to share the resources and the advantages at the very least of these AI station devices towards lesser devices in the chain. So you're going to be able to take advantage of those benefits and filter it down the line. How that plays out in real time, I'll have to wait and see, because I mean, how much that's filtered on more than just comms? Well, I want to see it in reality. But before we move on, again, regarding the Synology own LLM choice, the one that's been tailored, the one that's been geared inside here, either whether that is preloaded or at least one-clicked loaded. From there, they also said that they will allow for integrated, there's a range of pre-ready AI LLMs that you can utilize. So again, your third-party one of choice, you can be able to choose those. And again, depending on the hardware architecture for what they're offering, how many of these are going to be a locally deployed LLM and how many of them are going to be using the agent that you're going to be patching in with a third-party one, your Gemini, your OpenAI, etc., etc. Still remains to be seen at this point, but at the very least they are saying it's going to be possible, and I should bloody well hope so, because there are other NAS brands already offering this, although arguably not with the polish that Synology showed at this event. Next up, Cluster Manager. Frankly, at first I thought this was just Synology continuing to reinvent the wheel they've invented, and that is the ability to manage multiple NAS devices. Let's be realistic, that's not new. We're seeing that logic more and more, but as Synology expands this logic from a long time ago from a single CMS system into then multi-site, into multi-country, into multi-system, and then grouping them all together, they've kind of changed, they are saying, the architecture of how these things are managed within the workload cluster, and now are leaning more, and they're reorganizing towards a containerized architecture with the devices, all of the different NAS devices there, all separated into individual containers for management and moving around effectively, but also allowing it then to assign better quality of service workloads for bandwidth management and also for different tasks, things being moved around, and with profile building as well. Now, again, this was another thing that seemed to be baked into DSM itself. This wasn't this being demonstrated here inside the ActiveProtect. Stay tuned for that shortly. But still, at the very least, this is going to give users the advantage on the multi-site deployments to have a better, convenient overlay single pane of glass management. But I will argue there was no mention of licensing, no mention if this is going to be here's one or two licenses to test it out. So if it was anything like ActiveProtect, which recently saw the retirement of the free license, I can't imagine Cluster Manager is going to arrive with a free option any day soon. At the very minimum, it might have a trial. Which brings us to ActiveProtect, arguably a platform that I have a very mixed relationship with, because as much as I love DSM, I understand there are some people that don't really like to, they're not looking to install Audio Station, they're not looking to install Plex, they want just the storage. They want all the features of Active Backup for Business, we'll come back to that as well later, but to the max. And I get why perhaps there would be users out there that want that, even on a little 2 or 4 bay, but obviously scaling out to the rack mount level and the petabyte scale, it makes a great deal more sense then, even at that price tag. ActiveProtect Manager, they were talking about ActiveProtect Manager 2. ActiveProtect Manager 2.0, allowing them to take advantage and leverage some of the advantages of AI. Now, a lot of that comes down to, for example, they went through laborious detail about how malware, how ransomware, viruses and more have been greatly improved upon thanks to AI. Let's face it, the number of vulnerabilities that have been found thanks to AI, in particular in the last 6 months, of course, where humans just weren't aware of these weaknesses within the code level. So you're going to need AI protections to stay on top of that. Now, what they're talking about here is the evolved ransomware detection, the scale up towards the resilience of their platform, but also running bait traps, running the ability to not only see when bad things are happening from everything down to learning how file transmission is being managed, but also their system being proactive in its resistance to these attacks, which are in some cases going to be unique day to day. This was followed by quite an interesting live demo, and again, I wish there'd been more live demos. Some of them were recorded in advance, of course, but a lot of them were live, just showing a new feature within ActiveProtect to not only allow for the already existing backup and mounting of third-party VM platforms, again, your Hyper-V, your Proxmox, Azure, all that kind of stuff, but also the ability to migrate them without having to pull them back and forth to the NAS. It was a really interesting demonstration there. If you have multiple VM sources managed by ActiveProtect, to actually avoid it being managed from actual data being passed through the middle, thereby speeding up the process, effectively creating a task where if one of those fails, you can mount it onto another and migrate between multiple of these platforms. It was really interesting watching that happening in real time on a freshly deployed device. That brings us in to anomaly detection, another ActiveProtect feature. You're getting used to hearing that yet? This not only allows for monitoring of unusual file processes, unusual drive health, unusual file changes en masse, but also different behavior patterns where you can set the system up to learn what new access patterns are, what are existing access patterns, and therefore learn when a user isn't accessing a system properly. Growing file inconsistencies as well, alongside training it for that real behavior, and therefore the admins being able to quarantine and limit clearance to individual users, as well as isolating areas of storage in backup ops where it is deemed abnormal, or there are anomalies happening in real time that the AI would be able to capture based on that historical information, where a human would even not be able to create the tailored alert for that situation, because this is a truly unique situation, but also that their span of knowledge about how individual users and how individual clients behave could be, so modularized and therefore recognized when things aren't running right. Moving slightly away from ActiveProtect, I'll also say I liked the improvements that they demonstrated in the log center. They were talking about a log center that allowed you to monitor multiple systems, something we've sort of seen within CMS Manager to a lesser degree, but the idea that you could create a single log manager that clearly shows individual NAS systems and their activity for the human monitoring, not just the AI stuff. I like that, and again, hopefully in DSM 7.4 we're seeing as much attention to the non-AI services as we are to the AI-assisted ones. There were other micro improvements that were discussed, such as added encryption at FIPS 140 into their already existing layer of encryption options, and even within ActiveProtect there was improvements being discussed there in terms of data efficiency. And let's be honest, between that and the storage efficiency we talked at the top of the video, it's never been a better time for that, and I'm not saying Synology were capitalizing from that, but them saying that was their driving force for doing this, I find it perhaps a little hollow, but it does make sense, and it will result in storage efficiency for those that have already got pre-existing systems, that are those that are trying to wait out the clock in terms of hard drive prices. These are going to be good things for storage efficiency to make your existing storage arrays last longer. But if we go through the things that I really liked and things that I didn't, let's start positive. I will say straight away, the tailored human versus AI management on the system, them changing their architecture to be a little bit more AI supportive, I'm not going to say it's a wholly bad thing, because as AI gets more and more integrated into systems, more and more into our devices, from the smallest to the biggest, it kind of makes sense that your NAS system needs to be geared and designed in a way that it can be picked up and work with those systems a great deal better moving forward, as long as they still maintain existing architecture to help towards older SQL databases, older systems and arrangements of data. I want to see their AI services work better with old legacy systems to help them migrate over, not just focus on things moving forward. But again, I was really pleased with that. Also, that migration between the different VM platforms with no upload download happening from the NAS, really, of those large scales of data for the migration when it's required. I really liked seeing that. Again, you might not have multiple VM platforms, but different site to site, again, going from legacy to current. that is going to be nice to see. But again, that is an ActiveProtect thing. More on that in a moment. Also, the AI agent built into the desktop of DSM, I really like that. There was no discussion if there's going to have it built into your DS Finder or any of the applications for your mobile device there, for your portable device, to take advantage of that agent. And also the DSM agent tool there is both in version 1.0, but they talked about version 2.0 where they want to go with it, where you can give it active commands to the system, so it no longer becomes an assistant per se. It ends up being both an assistant and an action, the true agent architecture, but not without issues, something I'll talk about in a moment. And as mentioned, the improved log center multi-site single pane of glass, absolutely loved that. And the integration with a lot of these services within Synology Drive, hopefully, but also existing things like the Office suite there, like the chat, like any of those things. I'm more than happy to have those in there as long as they have an off switch, and the limits to which they can be used are both intuitive and easy to deactivate if you require. Also, the improved encryption. There was mentioned a few times. Not only it's mentioning in the network server stack, but also in the AI stack there, with the guardrails being front and center. I'm glad they're focusing on that. We've seen too much AI deployment in the world of NAS recently, where I just don't feel they are talking about the guardrails enough. They say the word security as if it's to shut people up, and not talking about the active guardrails, the active barriers, and there was a lot of that, which I was really pleased to see. And also Synology, at the very least, being very clear that they are building on top of an existing LLM. That's, you know, splinters happen, these things happen, but when they start referring to it as their model, I mentioned earlier on during the presentation Q&A sections, they did talk about, and someone asked the question about if you are building on top of open source and you're calling it proprietary, how are you going to manage your updates? Is the AI going to, you know, stay current? Are you going to build on that, or are you going to keep circling back to that open source model? And how often are you going to come back to it? Because how often have we seen examples, Synology using Linux kernel or certain databases or certain builds of things, and not staying on top of the more recent versions of it, for good and for bad, of course.
Cedric from IT Daily again. You talked about developing your own LLM. Did you start from an open source basis, or did you develop something completely from scratch? And to follow up on that, these models evolve very quickly. How do you plan on keeping the model relevant if we have to use your own model?
我想这个问题非常的关键。我想我们也会站在巨人的肩膀。
Very good question. We believe in the importance of standing on the shoulders of giants, so we did use an open source LLM as a basis for fine-tuning for our own DSM agent. So we use an open source model as a base. As for how we can follow the rapidly changing models, we think the best way to follow the development of AI is using AI itself. So we do use our model to keep track of all the new developments in the LLM model world, and we are continually fine-tuning our own model and pushing these new changes to this model to see if they work better. And all of this is to offer our customers with the best possible AI experience.
And finally, and this is going to surprise some people, as much as I have mixed feelings about ActiveProtect and what it means for DSM, and again, we will come back to that, they did talk about, towards the closing segments, virtual ActiveProtect, ultimately software-only ActiveProtect. Now, this wasn't the first time I saw Synology talking about some of their software becoming NAS free. Notwithstanding, we've already seen the surveillance platform turn into C2 surveillance station, but also their file search application, deeper search or deep search, their semantic search tool is going to be available at a license for non-NAS devices. You can be able to install it. I did ask someone on the Synology stand about what exactly is that bringing, that, you know, the likes of Copilot are, and you know, their main counter argument, they said it's going to be native, it's going to be built around their system and how it works. How that plays out, of course, when you're not deploying it on Synology systems on a license, we'll have to wait and see on that one. But at the very least, it's nice to see some of their software features being available without the hardware, and therefore the price point, when some of us have argued that buying a Synology NAS, in some cases you're paying for the software and not the hardware. If they can extend this logic out, I think it could actually be quite good for a lot of buyers, but I don't know where anyone's going to where they're going to draw the line. Let's be realistic, they are never going to release DSM without the hardware level, because they know what they've got there and they know where the money has to be. And now onto the things that I didn't like, or the things that I didn't like the smell of, if you know what I mean. Number one, when they were showing a DSM agent, they did a demonstration of monitoring different users and then also utilizing some of the behavioral stuff to see that a user, either they needed the DSM agent to delete a user and effectively just to bar access. They asked the DSM agent to do it and it did it.
To Linda's account, including connection details. It notices that the IP address is accessed from a public one, which shouldn't be. And then it also recognizes file activity statuses. So it shows that Linda somehow has accessed 1,500 files under 20 minutes. I don't think that's possible for any well-experienced DSM user. So it even gives us a conclusion of both of these indicates a potential anomaly. And then what's important is that it even asks us if we want to deactivate Linda's account right away. And before we click on yes, let's just check if Linda's account is really still up and normal. Yeah, okay. So to help you have a grip of the comparison, let's come back to DSM agent and ask it to really deactivate Linda's account. So we can reply with a simple yes, and the DSM agent is working its magic already. So if we roll to the top, it tells us that, okay, Linda's account is successfully deactivated.
It didn't ask for a password, it didn't ask for double verification, and I get that can be inconvenient, and maybe there was some secret layer in the demo that they were showing that they removed for consistency's sake, but the idea that an admin can kill a user like that without even asking me, am I sure? That felt odd. So again, maybe that was something that was shortened for the presentation, but I don't think I should be allowed, I don't think I can actually delete a user within DSM without a few layers of, are you absolutely sure, can you please authenticate yourself there? Yes, it was an admin using it, but still, other than at command layer level, I don't think you should be able to do things like that so briefly and easily. And as mentioned, the cluster manager, for all their talk about it, and I do like these improvements, it's definitely going to have a license, but we'll have to wait and see. And again, with Active Insight, that's only a clear sign of that. Another thing about, they said they removed a slide that was about the integration of existing CLIs, MCPs and skills, and they didn't really talk about that. You may already have an existing architecture in place and you want to know how much of this you can actually port over and migrate with the Synology system. And the fact it wasn't in the slides and they said it was in there originally removed suggested to me that either it's not going to be there at launch or it's just not ready yet. So I was kind of disappointed, but at the very least they highlighted it was there and it wasn't. But probably the biggest one, and this was when I asked a question during the Q&A, because up to that point, I didn't really feel I needed to ask a question because everything was pretty clear. Synology are focusing more and more enterprise, and they are clearly seeing the way people are using and wanting AI services and going, do you know what, we need to tailor our system accordingly. So at that point, I didn't want to ask any questions, but when they got towards the end of the ActiveProtect stuff, and they were talking about ActiveProtect 2.0, and they talked about anomaly detection, and they were talking about some of the efficiency stuff there, at no point were they talking directly about Active Backup for Business. And my biggest fear, as I said for a long while, is that when ActiveProtect was rolled out, they could see there was money coming in from this platform, and they could see that Active Backup for Business is not generating a return revenue, and also it is part of a larger system. And I asked, are any of these benefits going to be trickled down and filtered into Active Backup for Business? Because, you know, ActiveProtect, it is built on the DNA, it's built on the bones and the structure of Active Backup and indeed Hyper Backup as well. And they made it clear. They said these are only going to be for ActiveProtect, aka the premium platform.
Hi.
Is there going to be any of these improvements making their way kind of down the food chain into active backup for business, such as the Anomaly monitoring, stuff like that, the AI-driven stuff?
I guess Tony, for this question?
Yeah, so far, when we're talking about the AI and machine learning anomaly detection features, that's going to be an exclusive feature inside of the ActiveProtect manager environment.
Which I do not like the sound of. Again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning of this video, when multiple people had said to me, DSM 8.0, and then all of a sudden it's DSM 7.4. So I don't think Synology's ever done a 0.4 of these things. And it just, once again, reiterates that I think Synology are eyeing up how much of active backup should exist in a DSM 8, and also where the money is. They didn't say we're killing off active backup, but there is no more development happening there. And if none of this is filtering down, they clearly choose their lane here. So yes, active backup, as long as it continues to work the way it does, great. And also, as long as they aren't just going to retire or grandfather the way it is now, and then all of a sudden a new version will come out, and then DSM 8 rolls around, and then active backup is gone, but then they introduce ActiveProtect with a free license, or ActiveProtect Lite, or something like that, where it supports. That's where I think they're going to go. But again, they give me no solid concrete indication of that. But it just feels that way when they're putting so much time and effort into ActiveProtect, and seemingly none of that is going into active backup for business. The anomaly detection stuff, like it's all on AI-driven, like anti-malware, anti-resilience. I was making all these notes throughout. Again, not just them not mentioning active backup, but they still wouldn't talk about the payment structures. They wouldn't talk about how much was going to be utilised there. Someone's clinking chairs around me. I haven't got to go see a doctor. Back when DSM 7 first rolled out, there was this whole business of DSM 6.2. What was being carried over and what wasn't. What was being amalgamated, like Synology Moments, then turning into Synology Photos, and Photo Station all being put together. There's things that were kept, things that weren't, things that had to be re-added later on. Now, DSM 7.4, in my opinion, is DSM 8, technically. Because DSM 8, I think, was meant to be this bigger AI-driven beast, and either DSM 8 isn't ready, or DSM 8 has certain qualities about it which are going to be big changes. But as time wears on, they have not been able to roll out DSM 8, and instead have rolled out DSM 7.4 and pulled over some of those features, some of the AI stuff, some of which I like, some of which I'm not as keen on, and some of which I know some of you aren't going to like at all. But again, this all feels like Synology playing for time on DSM just a wee bit. These are good integrated features, but more and more we're seeing a lot of the feature development, a lot of the improvements happening at the far end, towards the enterprise end, happening towards the ActiveProtect end, and DSM is somewhat getting left in the lurch a little bit with some of the now, frankly, looking like they could potentially become legacy applications. I've said it once and I've said it again. The death knell for me about Synology DSM will be when active backup changes, when it changes to whether they get rid of it in a DSM 8 upgrade, whether they amalgamate it into ActiveProtect and give it a light moniker and therefore license bar it when they realise, you know what, we'll just take the hit, because if a bunch of people get angry, we've already got their money anyway, and they were never going to buy our system next time. You know, this is all hypothetical, but I like some of the things that are coming to DSM 7.4. I just don't quite like the concept of DSM 7.4 in its entirety, and hopefully Synology will not look at ABB and think, well, this needs to go. This is a thorn in our side, because for every 100 people it might get rid of, we might get 15 paying punters, but we'll have to wait and see. But this was the coverage of DSM, the next chapter. Thanks again to Synology for inviting me to the event. Again, I know I've been critical, and it was really big of them to invite me. There were other people there, and I can't wait to hear what they think about this. But thank you so much for watching. There's an article below, and once again, do head over to Black Void's article. He's gone into a lot of detail, he's got a lot of the slides there, and it really breaks things down beautifully. It really helped me with the storage efficiency section of this. I would argue he covered it better than Synology did in their presentation. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.